Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, I'm going to talk about a pretty fascinating subject matter here, and that is vortexes. And I think is the largest, particularly in the United States, but I think in the world is called a place called Giant Rock. Now, this vortex has been highly overlooked and I think even suppressed from many people in the, quote, New Age alternative community. But I live near this vortex, which is near a place called Joshua Tree National Park, which is a famous national park, which is close to Palm Springs, California. So it's about a 20 or 30 minute ride from central Palm Springs, the city of Palm Springs. And I used to live in that area and went to Giant Rock often. It's kind of a cool, fun place to go to and certainly has lots of cool energies. And actually, I should have moved up there from the Coachella Valley, Palm Springs area, and stupidly didn't. But that's another story. But Giant Rock is a fascinating place, and you'll notice that I have inserted many pictures of it into this actual lecture. And I'm going to discuss the vortex. I'm also going to get into the extraterrestrial contact that I made up there and everything else. So that's where my extraterrestrial contact situation started and how I was kind of directed to different people and started the alien resistance movement pretty much to help people that were getting abducted, which is a horrible, traumatic thing. And I'm going to go into that and talk about all those things as well, because it seems like a lot of people are armchair UFO people and investigators. I faced these hostile aliens and basically did a advanced form of combat with them and stopped a lot of people from being abducted. I produced the only known anti-abduction technologies as well, and saved a lot of people from a lot of trauma that were going through these abduction experiences. And I am going to release all of our stories on this particular channel in the coming months. Everything's going to be released by IJOS in the coming year. Nothing is being held back on any level whatsoever. But let's talk about this. Now, what happened particularly in the 90s was the fact that a lot of press was giving to Sedona, Arizona, and its many little vortexes that are in that area, which I have went to and did spend time there, which is quite a fascinating area as well. And there is a striking beauty to Sedona, Arizona, that with the red rocks and the large monuments that its plain attractiveness as a tourist location overshadowed Giant Rock, which is kind of in a plain deserty area, which personally I grew to love, even though I used to hate deserts, but I ended up living in the desert area there for 30 years and grew to kind of love the desert in its own primitive, violent, disgusting way, because it is so extreme. And of course, the temperatures there, which are hot 24 hours a day, almost all year round, make living in the Coachella Valley, Palm Springs area very difficult and costly because you have to cool yourself all the time with high electrical rates. But going through that, Giant Rock, of course, as I said, Sedona, because of Dick Sufkin, the famous New Ager guy, has written courses, a hypnotist, and got very good CDs, training CDs. He's been around for many, many years. He's still alive. I believe he's up in his 70s or even 80s now. Put out a lot of good information, and I do recommend Dick Sufkin's He has guided meditations that'll take you through stages. Things I really have used over the years and have enjoyed. So I do recommend anything from Dick Sufkin. But he was the one that wrote about the Sedona Vortex and started the whole interest in that area. And I will go into that as well. I don't want to cover so much in one lecture, which gets too long. But I'll talk about Sedona Vortex and my experiences there. And I had some pretty amazing experiences there. So we'll have to, getting back to Giant Rock. Now, Giant Rock is a fascinating one. It's called Giant Rock. Why? There's a giant rock there. So apparently this was the largest freestanding rock, and as I said, you can see that in my lecture pictures here. It's the largest freestanding rock in the world. I'm not sure. I think so. And it's quite an interesting rock. And it's been a gathering place for spiritual people for thousands of years. The Indians of that area would gather there. Many would travel a long distance to go there. And it became popular in the 70s when a particular, it started off with the fact that the guy who built the Integratron, a man called George Van Tassel, who then had extraterrestrial contact, was taken on a ship, and in general had all sorts of huge gatherings there, huge meetings. He wrote different, he had newsletters out, and he was a retired aircraft engineer, I believe. He worked for the aerospace industry as a flight inspector in the 1940s. He had this alien contact. He worked for McDonnell Douglas. He worked for Hughes Aircraft and Lockheed. These are the big government military craft people. They worked a bunch of military contracts. This is very typical in Southern California, near Los Angeles. They have all these huge military contractors that make Lockheed, etc., who made all these military and other types of planes. So he eventually met a guy, of course, a typical story that goes on there. There was a man he met that told him about Giant Rock, a Frank Kritzer, who, of course, was called the Crazy Dutchman, another misunderstanding of the word Deutsch. He was a German guy, and he was mining around Giant Rock, trying to make money, and had actually dug out a place to live underneath Giant Rock. Because you got to remember, it's super, super hot here. You're talking about 100+ temperatures that never ends. And the way you cool yourself down is you have to go into the ground. And of course, that's how you make smart deserts. So you're talking about extremely hot desert climates that are up in these areas. It is a part of the Mojave Desert area. It's not that far from Death Valley, per se. It's not really close, but it's not far. Giant Rock, the rock itself, is a 7-story boulder, to give you an idea. So you're talking about, that's why it's the largest stand. So 7 stories, which is approximately 70 feet or more. And it's just sitting there. You can go there and touch it and everything else. It's not something that is protected, and you can see how someone did make a home underneath it. And this whole area was developed by George Van Tassel after meeting this guy who he then found out about this place, went up there, at least. But, of course, the interesting story about Frank Kritzner is he was a German spy, and the police closed in on him, and he blew himself up in 1942. So he was accused of being a Nazi spy, and probably was, like most Germans who have very close connections to their country and don't really care about anybody else. So, very classic. Just one of the many stories about the kind of mentally ill and sociopathic German culture in general. It just pops up everywhere. So you just can't ignore it once you read about these things. And people just kind of float over it, not really thinking, well, who are these people? Because they are everywhere, and they've nothing but troublemakers. So Van Tassel, who built the Integratron, was supposed to be a round type building, which I've been in many times, who you're supposed to walk through, and it would then give you immortality and actually lower your age. Some people call it a giant multi-wave oscillator, and the entire building, which is fairly large, round building, and you'll see pictures of it in this as well, actually has no nails in it, so it was kind of fitted together, and there's some strange acoustics in the center of it. So it's quite fascinating. I had really detailed photos of this on a videotape. Unfortunately, one of the many things that got lost over the years. I don't think anybody filmed the way I did it, and I went over his entire property. It was actually up for sale, and I was going to buy it at one time, but didn't have the cashola, unfortunately. But there's many interesting areas there, and of course, the actual building, which is built within the vortex of Giant Rock, has a very, very strong energy from it. And unfortunately, here again, because of certain things that happened in my life recently, files were lost where I had actually Polaroid pictures of the Integratron, which actually showed energy coming out of these rods. You had 4 rods around the Integratron that channeled vortex energy, and I actually captured the energy coming off of them with a Polaroid camera. Now, that's why I keep recommending Polaroid cameras, and it doesn't happen every time. I don't know, I took probably 10 or 15 shots that day, and when I got home and looked at it, because I was just taking pictures of the building, here it is. And it's not something you can say, oh, that's something in the film. There are 4 rods, and you see energy coming out of these rods. Well, isn't that fascinating? Exactly at that, not near it, not close. Now, oh, it looks like it's coming. No, exactly from it. So these are the kind of proof that is irrefutable by anybody that has a brain. And of course, that's fairly rare. Most people have brains of fleas. And I hate to insult fleas. Most people don't even reach that. So the whole idea is that very fascinating area. It's kind of overlooked because it's in a strange little area. The houses around it are kind of dumpy and it's off the beaten track. Giant Rock in general used to be an airport, and they had huge UFO meetings here. And this is where crafts landed and made contact with people, and where I had made contact as well. This was a prime area to do it. There are other ones as well, and a lot goes on in this area, which I'm going to talk about, and there's new footage coming out in this area near Palm Springs, and of crafts with good pictures being taken, as well as I'm going to tell you about a place where if you live near Palm Springs or can drive there in a few hours, you can pretty much guarantee to see a UFO. And I'm going to tell you where that is. So I saw them there all the time, and so did my wife and other people. So we saw all the time, we saw them in this particular area, and we'll tell you about that as well. So there's an awful lot in this kind of goofy little area called Palm Springs. I'm going to go into information about that and talk about that in general, and the horrific problems with the what's called the Coachella Valley, which I will detail as well. One of the horriblest places in the world to live for several reasons, and we'll cover that in future. So lots of fun things here coming up. So the whole idea is Giant Rock, and I've been there, as I said, many times. I used to sit by it. I went there. You can drive your car right next to it and park there. I brought many of my apprentices and others up there. It's a real fun place, and there's all sorts of interesting energies there. And you can do research. You can do psychic experiments, which seem to amplify everything you do in the vortex. You know, vortexes are very good to do really shocking things, meaning things like time travel, building your own portal to take you somewhere else, using radionic type machines for teleportation, time travel, etc. Now, things take a completely different energy of empowerment when you do it in a vortex. We tried to create artificial vortex, but we're unable to do that, of course. But this is where you start getting, this is how fun research is done. You go up in these areas, you do these kind of research, and this is where you can spend a lot of time up there at certain times of the year and get that very energetic feel from it. Now, the Giant Rock is, the rock is there. There's kind of a little mountain next to it. And little is the key word there. It's not this big giant, but it's fairly high. I don't know how many, 400 or 500 feet, whatever it is, to go up to the very top of it. And there's all these things around it. There's also a special little area, if anybody goes there, that if you go to Giant Rock, you kind of, and you're facing out into the desert where the, there was an airport there, and Van Tassel put his airport there. People would fly in there, etc. But if you look at the airport area, which is all gone now, nothing is there any longer. He had an airport, he put a little restaurant there, he had a whole thing going there, a whole little community, a cafe, his house was there, a gas station, I guess a little store. And of course he had a small airstrip, and some people claim that, I don't know, I don't remember ever hearing about this, but some sort of dude ranch for people to go up there. So he set up a whole little business out there to do that. And it was very popular in the late 60s and into the 70s. But towards the end of the 70s, the kind of the UFO meetings up there were getting too large, and unfortunately, it attracted a bad group of people, and they were starting to have problems. So if you, but as I said, if you're looking out at the airport type area where the landing strip was, to the left there, you'll see a giant pile of white crystal-like rocks, and these are vortex rocks. They're very powerful, and they're there for the taking. So we recommend people go up there and grab a couple of small ones. It's a huge stack, and you know, this is something people should have. It's really going to waste. And of course, like most of these places, I used to go up there and pick up trash and haul it out. You know, people don't respect things. There's a bunch of stuff there, but it's quite a fun, powerful place. Now, as I said, Giant Rock, and the is this 7-story freestanding rock, supposedly the largest in the world. So, and what is very interesting there, as I said, you can go up there and do many things, but in the nighttime, you see all sorts of wild things in the sky there. This is when, in terms of lights, what appear to be ships, not, you know, again, unfortunately, they're not very close, but there has been lots and lots of sightings up there all the time. It's one of these things that nobody seems to talk about. One interesting thing about this area, and I've talked about this before, and that's the sighting of the anti-gravity US B2. Now, this isn't far from where I had that sighting. Now, in terms of mileage, it's probably about 20 miles away in a place called Banning, which is just off the 10 freeway as you enter Palm Springs. It's a little town, and of course, what's interesting is that Palm Springs is on the other side of the mountain. There's a mountain between Palm Springs and what you would call the beach or the coast, which would be called the San Diego area, which is loaded with military bases. This is where the different airfields are, etc. So it's not surprising. But, you know, it's another thing not talked about. The people in San Diego that are all military don't talk much about what the military is doing. But, of course, this is where, you know, Top Gun was filmed and everything else. So in between there, obviously the B-2 was taken on. You're not going to hear talk of this, people. People don't talk about this. You think everything's known. Nonsense. Secrets are made and kept for generations. So I talked about that incident where I was driving through that town. I was the only one on the road because there was a horrible thunderstorm. And I had just come out of a person's house who used to be my radionic machine builder. And driving through the middle of the town, which I normally don't do, but I did this time because I hadn't really looked at this tiny little poop of a town called Banning. And I said, well, I haven't seen this in a long time. I wanted to drive through there just to see what was in Banning, that little town. And lo and behold, it was a lightning, and really bad lightning was happening. And lo and behold, who popped up over our heads, and then behind us a little bit was the anti-gravity B2 ship sitting there, because the one problem with the anti-gravity machines, aircraft, whatever you can call them, is that they have problems with lightning. Now, I've heard this, and apparently it's true. So he had to come down, get out of the lightning, and of course then disappeared. Or maybe he turned on his invisibility so nobody could see him after I was able to see him for, I don't know, 10 seconds, which I was going to try. I was turning around to look at it, and of course it was gone very quickly or disappeared. And I happened to, at that time, had my wife with me in the car, so I was able to have another witness to it, which is rare in general, going to see this guy. So that's an incident I had. But this is about, as the crow flies, about 30 miles from Giant Rock. Now, another 10 to 20 miles from Giant Rock heading into the Mojave Desert is the largest Marine Corps base in the world, 29 Palms. Now, this is a Marine Corps base which they've transferred many other Marine Corps bases to. It's a training base. People don't stay there a long time, but they all train there. And obviously, it's in the desert. Well, where are the Marines fighting all the time, and where do they have to deal with similar elements when going to the Middle East? Well, this is a perfect training base. So 29 Palms has been there for a long time, and there's a long history of the military training in this area. Patton trained down from in a place called Indio, or near Indio, in this kind of, I guess that would be about 40 or 50 miles south of the Marine Corps base today. Patton used to train his tank corps up in there because this was an area that was similar to the Middle East where they were originally going. So this is a base where the Marines all train at, 29 Palms. You can check that out. So it's very interesting that this would be situated there. It's also interesting that a lot of strange stuff happened between these kind of military bases or near military bases, which I'm not sure is coincidental whatsoever. There was a huge earthquake where the ground moved about 7 feet in this area, which was centered in, of all places, near Giant Rock. Literally moved 7 feet. Yet the surrounding towns and 30 miles away in Palm Springs, while people had major movements, it appears that sand movements, you don't get too much structural damage. So, but this had a major. Now, was that huge earthquake connected to something that the government and military was doing? Well, as I said, this is a hush-hush area. And as such, the hush-hush area, you don't really know. So, there isn't much military that stays in the local communities there very long. The people come in, train, they leave. You don't see much military movement. Of course, you do see trucks and other things frequently, convoys going in and out of these places. But what I'm saying is you don't see a military presence, people walking into stores with uniforms on, or anything like that. So what you do see is odd occurrences, which happens in this lander's place where Giant Rock is. Now, here's the kicker to Giant. But as I said, this is one of the largest vortexes. People don't talk about it like they do with Sedona. And as I said, Sedona is a whole nother conversation. There's a lot to talk about there. It is strikingly beautiful with these red mountains. They have a thing called Bell Rock. It looks just like a UFO, a saucer. And I attempted to climb that and was kind of thrown off the mountain, which is another interesting story. But we'll get to that. But there's a striking difference. So they kind of moved over there. But Sedona also is a place of just basic tourism, even though it's a lot of New Age. It is not the kind of empowerment that you get from Giant Rock. And it's, as you said, it's one of those very overlooked things. So it's definitely a place to go to charge items. I used to bring bottles of water up there and charge it. And then bring them back. I collected a lot of those rocks. And it's just a fun place to go. It's a beautiful spot in general, and having that Giant Rock. But, okay, here's the kicker, people. Kicker! Are you ready for it? Are you? Well, now everybody heard of these earth changes that were coming. And as usual, it never happens. And we heard about the earth changes. You know, Edgar Cayce was famous for this, saying that basically California, starting at the San Andreas beginning of the earthquake fault, which, by the way, happens to be in the Coachella Valley. It's in the Palm Springs area, south of Palm Springs, probably 30, 40 miles, but this is where it was supposed to break off. So, that was the first thing, and the talk was that California was going to fall into the ocean. Well, Casey was right on a lot of things. That never happened. And, of course, there is this huge San Andreas fault there, and nothing has happened for many, many years because they're saying that the actual fault now is kind of on a lip. It's stuck. It can't move. And when it does move, it's going to be massive destruction. But, when you live in California, particularly Southern California, you hear that all the time. Be careful. We're going to have the big ones coming. And, of course, I've been through the major earthquake that was there was a 7.5 earthquake, which is quite a monkey to go through, and you can't even stand up when the ground is shaking like that. So I've been through several of those earthquakes, which maybe I'll talk about in the future as well. Kind of fascinating. Dumped out half the water in my hot tub. That's how slushing action was, so which is quite amazing. So you've got 3-4 feet of water, and half of that is gone. So that's how powerful this is. So it's quite interesting of how earthquakes are. So Casey predicted that was going to happen. Never happened. He said that was going to happen in 1969. Needless to say, that didn't happen. Last time I checked, California is still connected to the rest of the continent, or the rest of North America. So, but the big thing was earth changes were going to come. And I don't know how many people know why they didn't come or what the explanation was by some people. And that was the fact that the energy for this massive earthquake was diffused through Giant Rock Vortex. And that's why. Now,
well, that sounds good, Thor, but it's just kind of speculative, isn't it? Don't even mean nothing. Now, how can we prove it?
well, that's right, dumb guy. We can't really prove it except Giant Rock, the 7-story rock, that has been there for, millions of years? Tens of millions? Hundreds of millions? At that time that the actual changes were supposed to happen, broke in half. That's right, people, and you'll see a picture of it here as well. It broke in half. Now, it appears that Giant Rock took the energy in of the massive changes, diffused it, and part of the problem there, and maybe the sign from higher energetics, here it is. We saved you. Well, isn't that interesting? Maybe these massive earth changes, which could have destroyed the entire world, or horribly caused problems throughout the entire world, was all saved by Giant Rock. So, until next time, think about that.